just going to give you a quick overview of what the day is going to look like. And while I'm doing that, if you could put who you are and where you're from in the chat, that would be really helpful. During the event, because there's quite a few of us, if we could all stay on mute when possible, just to make sure there's no echo. If you do want to chat, put your hand up in the thingy bob, chat emoji, and or just put your question in the chat and we'll try and come back to them. As I said, video is optional. Yeah, let's get going. I think we've got an hour and a half. We won't be having a break, but the way it will run is it's probably going to be fairly interactive. So we'll start with a bit of a Mentimeter, which is some questions about you and what your feelings are about walking. And we'll use Mentimeter throughout the session today. We'll have a little video from me about what Walk Derbyshire is and about the whole systems approach. Then we'll go into some breakout rooms looking at what a systems approach looks like in the High Peak. And then we're going to hand over to Scott, who's going to wave shortly, from Press Red, who is going to give us some specific High Peak data and other relevant data so we can look at where we want to be focusing our thoughts and our conversations. And then after Scott, we'll just talk about the next steps. So if all is ready to go, if Katie, can you put the first Mentimeter up, which is around why is walking important to you, either personally or in your work, or both? And I think Katie, Katie will put it in the chat. If you're doing it on your phone, you might have to press next question as they come through, but just have a little try.
So you can either use the menti.com and the code at the top of the screen now, or you can just click on the link in the chat. Either should work.
I can't see the link in the chat, Katie. Oh, it's because there's other people who spoke since.
Can everybody else see it? Can you see the link in the chat? Oh, yes, I can see it.
Got a load of results coming through. So we've got for mental and physical health, mental health benefits as well as physical, to get out and about. Accessible to most people. It's an easy way for most people to build activity into their daily lives. Simplest form of exercise, breath of fresh air. Want as many people to enjoy walking as possible and enjoy the benefits of walking. Good for my own well-being, to get out and about. Personally, I definitely need walking for my mental health. In work, it's about encouraging people to be active in a way which suits them, and walking is so accessible. Stress relief. Yep. I love the fresh air and it's a great exercise. It's cheap and easy to access. Low impact activity with the majority of people are able to access brings great benefits to physical and mental health. It's good for me. I walk to work most days and it's a mental buffer between school drop off and work. On a personal level, it allows me to connect with my family or get some headspace. I hate running, so walking is better. Physical well-being. Important in working as we're a wellbeing charity, we recognise the benefits of physical activity. Walking can be rigorous or light and therefore can be tailored for a wide audience. Walking is good for your wellbeing, fresh air, headspace and scenery. That's brilliant, some really good responses there. And it has been a general theme when we've been talking to our different groups over the time, because we're doing these stakeholder events for each district and borough in Derbyshire. And mental health has been coming out really strongly. So that's something that we need to have a look at sharing and maybe working up a little bit more. Thanks for that, Katie. I'm just going to put my little video on, and the reason it's a video is because, as I said, we're doing these across Derbyshire, so I wanted everybody to have the same information. So just bear with me while I set it up. Go. The vision of Walk Derbyshire is to make everyday walking the norm for all residents of Derbyshire, with a focus on our inactive population and our disadvantaged communities. We want to create a culture of walking with an emphasis around walking with our own communities and from our own doorsteps. We know that walking contributes to the vast majority of physical activity. It's available and accessible to everyone. There's an undaunting entry level, especially for those who are inactive. We know the physical and mental health benefits to walking. And when we talk about walking, we're talking about walking for both travel and for leisure. And we do know that walking is a cheap and clean way to travel. There are a number of elements to how Walk Derbyshire will be delivered. Insight and evaluation. Insight's important to ensure we're driven by our current knowledge and gaps in that knowledge and what walking levels look like across Derbyshire between our different demographics and geographies. Pressfred have been commissioned to complete bespoke walking insight packs, which will be shared with you today, with the aim to help guide conversations around how, where and who you can influence to walk more. Evaluation is important to capture and share learning on successes and things that could have gone better with a wider audience and to help us to iteratively change our approach to Walk Derbyshire. Leeds Beckett University are our Walk Derbyshire evaluation partners and they'll be embedding themselves into our work. A PhD student will be recruited to start in February 2023, and their initial focus will be on Walk Derbyshire. Communication and engagement. We need to build relationships across all sectors and with the communities that we work with. And we need to recognise the importance of co-production in everything that we do. When it comes to workforce, we need to make sure we're supporting them. Our workforce includes those who directly engage with people about walking to those who could advocate walking as part of their wider work. These could be people who are either paid or in voluntary roles. So what do they need to be able to enable people to walk more, and how can we support them? As part of our work, Walk Derbyshire will invest across the county to enable us to evaluate and share learning around how we support our residents to walk more on an everyday basis. Chesterfield, Erewash, Bolsover and North East Derbyshire will have the opportunity to be active neighbourhood pilots. These are our 4 districts with the highest levels of inactivity and the highest levels of deprivation. And that will provide an opportunity for stakeholders to come together with their communities to agree on the best ways to invest funding on a place-based level to increase levels of walking. High Peak, Derbyshire Dales, South Derbyshire and Amber Valley will have the opportunity to be community engagement and co-production pilots. So that's working with the community to develop an understanding of the barriers and opportunities to support residents to walk more. Within our Walk Derbyshire pilots, there are some principles we aim to embed. They include tackling local inequality and working where the greatest need is. We need to ensure that targeted community engagement is embedded in co-creation, delivery and evaluation. We need to collaborate, share and learn across local priority places and share that learning across Derbyshire. We need to ensure that we're looking at a systems approach, considering the widest range of influences and interactions. We need to ensure our practice is inclusive and that all our opportunities are available to anyone. We need to make sure we're connecting communities and ensuring people can access appropriate local opportunities. And we want to embed the Walk Derbyshire vision at a local level. Today's session will help support the pilots, and moving on from this, each district and borough will look at developing a consortium who will develop their local bid and take the pilot work forward. The pilot work provides us with an opportunity for each district and borough to explore and develop a system approach to walking. I'm now going to hand over to James Cook, who will talk us through the complexities and benefits of a system approach to walking.
Walk Derbyshire aims to adopt a systems approach to walking. It's important for us to develop a shared understanding of what system working means to us. A system is a way of thinking about the bigger picture. Systems thinking is less concerned with how an individual, department or organisation operates, but more with how the connections, interactions and feedback between them help shape the outcomes we want to see. When considering the wider sectors that play a role in enabling people to move more, it includes partners such as health, community safety, voluntary community sector, business, highways and many, many more. So why is taking a systems approach important for Walk Derbyshire? Physical inactivity, like many other social outcomes, is complex. By this, we mean there are a range of different factors that will impact upon whether a person is or isn't active. If we think about some of those different factors, for example, are there footpaths for people to walk on and what condition are they in? Are there main roads to cross? Are there planning applications around active travel and what do these include? And do people feel safe in their own communities? All of those different factors are interacting with each other in different ways at different times. And of course, when we talk with our communities to understand their lives, what's important to them, and what would enable them to walk more, we need to remember that each individual and family unit will experience those factors in different ways. As with all complex issues, there isn't a single intervention or solution. There's not one organisation or individual that has the answers. Change requires collective action from across sectors at all layers. We need to work collaboratively with our communities and with different partners and different sectors to understand those factors impacting on whether people choose to walk and what does that mean for our collective action. So how do we know that we are working in complexity? Well, some of what we do will be simple, some of it will be complicated, and some of it will be complex. For example, we know that something is simple if by taking an action, we know that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, if we switch a light switch on, we know that the light will come on. For something that is complicated, we know that if we take several actions, often expert steps, that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, a mechanic will know that when fixing a car engine, that they need to take several steps, often in the right order, at the right time, to achieve that desired outcome. In terms of complexity, well, we know we are working in complexity when we do not know in advance if something will work. For example, just because something works in one community, it does not mean that it will work in another community, or even that it would work in that same community a year down the line. It is important to recognise and understand when we are working in complexity. The good news is that although we do not know in advance if something will work, we can plan for working in complexity. Key to this is setting up processes to enable us to learn quickly about what is working so that we can amplify it. And just as importantly, learn quickly about what doesn't work so that we can stop or adapt. As we've established around inactivity, we know that we are working in complexity. So we need to feel comfortable that the work is to explore, experiment, and learn together about how Walk Derbyshire can enable people to walk.
Am I back? Hold on. I'm back. Can you all see me now? Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so just moving on from that, if we can all use the Mentimeter again, just to put in it which system partner it is that you represent. Hopefully we'll come up with a little bit of a pretty word cloud from that one. And then we're going to go into some breakout rooms. So we've got Active Derbyshire, Walk Derbyshire, Voluntary Community Sector, Local Authority, Public Health. Local Planning Authority. Valuation partner, brilliant. I'm sure we've got a little bit more than that in the room, but Peak National Park, fab. We will. Oh, hi Joe. Yeah, the Mentimeter link is just. Katie, can you just stick it in under Joe's question? So we're going to next go into some breakout rooms. So you will be automatically transported to these breakout rooms. We're going to be in there for 15 minutes. You have a facilitator and that person will feed back. So it's going to be Craig, Scott, myself, and I think Bev. Is Bev in the room? Yes, brilliant.
Yeah, I'm in the room.
Lovely. Thanks, Bev. Thanks for agreeing to do this today. So we'll do a 15-minute conversation, and then we'll do a quick feedback to the group. So Katie will send us to our breakout rooms. If anybody has any troubles, Katie's going to stay in the main room so she can direct you to where you need to be. Bev. So in my group, we had, well, everybody knew each other. Helen Thornhill, Sally Curley, Nicola Bruce and Sarah Johnson. Really good. Across High Peak, so things like social prescribing works really well in one area and not so well in the other. Part of that's because of where they sit and who they work with. The fact that there's different PCNs looking over both of those areas. Some issues around the referral system to Live Life Better Derbyshire and how that works, but we also heard that Live Life Better Derbyshire are aware of that and are looking at how to improve some of those systems. So that's the work that's going to go forward. Live Life Better Derbyshire were one of those people who was highlighted as who could have been here and isn't, but I can feedback that they were supposed to, and I will catch up with the representative after this as well. We talked about some of another barriers to a systems approach is the connection with Derbyshire County Council, so around footpaths, highways, safety improvements and stuff like that. And that's been a fairly common theme throughout all the other stakeholder sessions. So again, that identified who could have been here, which is a better representation from DCC and from highways. I think probably, yeah, that's what we mostly talked about: house referrals, social prescribing, some of the way the systems work across different areas. But it was a really good conversation, and thank you. And I think two of them, Sally and Helen, was it? I'm going to catch up separately about some good stuff. So I don't think it was you, Helen. I think it was somebody else. But if I've got that wrong, Sarah knows who it was.
Sarah, me and Nick. You and Nick,
Brill. I'll hand over. I think I said I'd go to Scott next. So what about your group, Scott?
Yeah, it was a good conversation. Time flies, doesn't it? I had George from Leeds Beckett, who's obviously part of the evaluation, which is great to have George on board and involved. We had a good conversation around there's still a need for this and really trying to work this through, and that whole space of, you know, the opportunity to test and learn through this, and the skills that the breadth of organizations and roles. And we had a little chat about whether the exercise that we did just before Heather should actually be about roles rather than organizations. And if it was about roles, we'd have had a really probably quite a wide net on there, or a description on there. And we talked about the need to bring in the voluntary sector and get local wherever we end up going. The need to think about what's already there in terms of the voluntary sector and bringing them into the work. We had a good conversation about things that might get in the way in terms of timescales. That's often what pushes people to just get things done on themselves. And I made the point, got 4.5 years with this. There's some time to think this through and think about how we build that connectivity, however it ends up being focused. Then there was offers of knowledge and skills from the National Park and others to connect this work. James made a really good point around the voluntary sector. Some of the smaller voluntary sector organisations are probably going to find it difficult to step into this space, but when we get a bit more local, how do we make sure that they're involved early, involved from in the design of what we might end up doing? We also had a little conversation about competing interests getting in the way sometimes, and how do we work that through between us? And then we start to just get into a bit of a conversation around who's missing, and it was very similar to what you've just reported back, Heather, in terms of that whole environmental planning, transportation, highways space. We've got a gap there, haven't we? If we reflect on all of the workshops, certainly, like we've seen some planning colleagues here and there, which has been good. But that whole county level side of things, we've got we've got to think about how we're going to sort that out and move that on, because they're really important to this, aren't they? There'll be environmental, you know, housing being built, roads being changed, you know, there'll be all kinds of different things happening in different parts of the high peak. So how do we capitalize on that? How do we bring that into our conversations at the next workshop about where we might want to go and how we might want to focus? And there, you know, there was quite a bit of this sense of trying to use this to test and learn so that we can think about how we make a bigger difference. So yeah, and then we mentioned health, and then, you know, that smaller VCS kind of infrastructure, and thinking about how we engage them in the work.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much, Scott. Craig, can I come to you to update on your group?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we covered quite a lot in the time that we had, so I've just been trying to make a few notes. We had Kaz from the Borough Council, Simon from the Borough Council, Liz from Zinc, Graham from the Bureau, and Joe from the Peak District National Park. We started the conversation really just interested in how we've sort of gone back to basic movement, walking being, you know, the most basic form of movement, and now the energy in the conversation that's, you know, emerging around this space. Quite interesting that how we're in different agendas, particularly around that physical and mental health that was mentioned at the beginning. We touched on opportunities and barriers actually throughout the discussion, you know, challenges around public transport, particularly in the high peak, getting from A to B to go to walk, or and also the cost of that, potentially the cost of public transport. So what is it we can do from a system perspective around transport in the area? Touched on accessibility and opportunities being accessible or not. For people, we had a bit of a conversation around what support do people need, but also what does support mean, and what support might the community need, which I guess took us a little bit towards sort of that the community engagement angle and aspect, which is part of the Walk Derbyshire ambition. So a lot of interest to try and move on that, and, you know, with the likes of Liz and Graham in the discussion and the people and communities that they work with, there's some absolute links. We coming back to that basic movement, we also spoke about it being such a big, diverse challenge. So, and again, I think that's linked to the wider agendas and potential that walking has. We also had a bit of a conversation which Scott just spoke about as well, about how do we focus? It's so big. How do we, you know, make something meaningful and not get overwhelmed by it? And would something along the lines of a benefits matrix, or doing some exercise around the benefits matrix, would that help to focus on some quick wins or some longer term ambitions? We also spoke about sort of walking and get into the reason and purpose and the necessity to walk, and what those reasons or purpose may be, and actually having that conversation with people to recognise what the purpose might be in walking. So quite a few sort of individual aspects. They're developing some type of suite of opportunities to support. And then we were just touching on at the end, we were talking about economically inactive and active, and unemployment and work status and so on. And we're just touching on sort of job centres, life coaches, social prescribing, and that, I guess, that one-to-one support for people, particularly around knowing who does walk and who doesn't. But we then ran out of time. So that's us, unless anyone's got anything to add.
Craig, I feel like you had double the amount of time that my room had, but so I feel like your conversation was very, very big. Bev, I'm going to come to you now. If you didn't talk about that much, don't worry.
Yeah, I think everything that's gone before, we've got the cursor being the last group, but one very important thing I think for me was that we had at least 2 partners in the group that were relatively new to other partners. So, you know, there was a little chunk of our time actually, who are you, where are you from? Kind of like, you know, really, really quickly, and actually not as much time for the discussions as we would have liked. What I will say is things that came out, so we kind of like had a little bit of a merged discussion really. It was about departments being accessible within organisations. So we had Barbara from Alzheimer's, we had Claire from Peak District National Park, we had Nat from the Bureau, we had Dawn from School Sports Partnership, and we had Rob from High Peak Borough Council. So a lovely mix of kind of like cross systems, etc. But you know, certainly within the Peak District National Park, you know, accessible development, you know, it's not just one department, and actually having those conversations can be quite difficult. Who are the right people? Can be very time consuming, and I think in the past in High Peak, I think we've all suffered a little bit of fatigue in actually this is too big, it's too difficult, and actually do we do it or not? So I think, you know, there's something around that actually of all those things being kind of like potential barriers. Rob brought in a little bit, and again, it was an important point that I'm very familiar with the Move More strategy for High Peak, and we all buy into it, we understand it. It seems to touch on everybody's agenda, but certainly we had at least a couple of people in our group that were not familiar with that. So there's something about that actually, this shared vision, and actually people understanding it, buying into it, which then helps the conversations, the communications with other parts of the system a lot more easy, and a lot really something about understanding that. Clearer messages again about how funding works, that came up, and really how it fits into other parts of the system, other organisations' agendas really. And their priority areas. So, for example, we talked, Dawn just briefly talked before she was so rudely cut off, about education and about it being a real closed shop. And, you know, think about the climate that we're in now with schools and all the pressures and difficulties that, you know, it becomes even more of a closed shop. However, Dawn and her magical tools that she's working on is actually, you know, within the schools, influencing them to look at health and well-being, and obviously walking is a massive part of that. So I think there's something certainly around using walking as a tool to other things. So certainly mental health, etc., you know, people buy into it, and I'm thinking specifically around health, GP land, PCNs, that actually they're, you know, the kind of like the realization that using walking as a tool to do something else, to achieve something else, it is something that they've started to understand and be interested in. So barriers, we didn't really get an awful lot of time. Who's missing? I think it's pretty much everything that you said before. And again, just basically voluntary sector, how does the message land with them? It's a free activity, so what? So, you know, it's how we develop that more with the voluntary sector. Is that okay?
That's brilliant, thank you very much. And I think from hearing all that feedback, everybody's of a fairly similar opinion really in the High Peak. And when we do talk about the people who aren't here, if people do have links into them, yeah, then go off and speak to them and see what you can get at them really. And we're thinking of the narrative to them, that so why, like you said, Bev, what walking can do to benefit what it is that they do. So how will it benefit them? And once they've got something around that, they're more likely to get involved, aren't they? Once they can see the benefit. Scott, did you just put your hand up? No. Okay.
I just put something in the chat.
Oh, what is it?
Don't worry about that now. Carry on, or we'll be late.
You ask it, right? Okay.
It's going to chime with something I'm going to say in a minute or two. So
got it. Yeah. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pass over to Scott to go through some of the data. But just before we do, penultimate Mentimeter of the day, which is what's your expectation from this work? So Katie, if you can put the chat link again.
joined up approach, better working together. What a great start that is. Collaboration across the system, learning, partners on board, more people walking. We wanted to ask this question because we just wanted to see where people are at. You know, what's great with that is we're not jumping into solutions. We'll get to solutions at some point and trying to test some of them, but at the moment we've just, as we've discussed in these previous groups, we need to just start thinking about actually who needs to be involved in this. How do we work? How do we connect with what's already there? How do we influence some of those investments that are going into new houses, into roads and pavements, and etc., etc. So there's a big part of this work about setting up what we want to learn in the High Peak through this work, and how we then can think about using that to influence creating bigger change going forward, which I think is a pretty exciting thing to be involved in. So it's really positive, which is fantastic. I'm gonna, as they keep coming through, I'm going to start trying to share my screen, and hopefully it will work. It doesn't always, but we might be lucky today. So let me just start finding what I need to find.
This is Scott's thinking face.
This is my thing. It is. This is my. But I will hopefully find it soon enough. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Hopefully this is coming up on your screen now. I'm going to just do a little test once it's up, because sometimes we get it up and it comes up, but then it doesn't work. So can you all see that? Yeah. Good.
Yep.
Got thumbs up. Has it all changed for you? Has the slide changed for everyone? Yeah. Yeah, it looks like it has. Okay, great. Yep. Okay, so over the next, I guess about 25 minutes, if I can, I'm just going to try and bring to life some of the analysis of walking data that we've been doing for the High Peak and for the other areas around Walk Derbyshire. The kind of pattern I'm going to go through is I'm going to start talking about physical activity generally, and then I'm going to show you how we've analysed the data. And then I'm going to start, show you the link between walking and physical activity and people being generally physically active. And then I'm going to get into the walking analysis in a bit of depth, looking at both demographic groups and what's going on for different demographic groups. And then I'm going to try and take it into place a little bit, which will hopefully help you play around with the information yourself and take it into the workshop in February. And then I've got most of this is adults. I've got one slide at children and young people, and I popped an image in the chat for a reason, and I'll come back to that in a minute or two. Okay, so let's just start zoomed out physical activity levels. What do they look like in the High Peak? And this is quite important because obviously walking contributes to people being physically active. What on earth are you looking at? The red line at the bottom and the red dots, that's the proportion of inactive people in the High Peak over the 6 years of adults over the 6 years of data that we've got currently from the Active Life survey. Okay, what does inactive mean? Well, this part of our pocket, this group of people are doing less than 30 minutes moderate intensity physical activity per week. Okay, and if you're doing that, the Chief Medical Officer says you're classified as inactive, as in you're not moving enough to benefit your health, and that's what it looks like over the 6 years of data. You can see the pandemic, the points that are in the slightly greyed out bit, they're pre-pandemic, and then we've got 2 data points in the post-pandemic, and you can see it rose up a fraction and it's come down a bit, but it's relatively stable. It's almost identical from baseline to where we currently are, which isn't the case for everywhere because the pandemic has had a bigger impact in other parts of the county. The black line just above that is England. Don't worry about that too much, but the green line at the top, if you follow that line, that's the proportion of active people in the High Peak. And what does active mean? Well, this part of our population are doing 150 minutes or more of moderate intensity physical activity. They're achieving the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation. Health. You can see the the impact of the pandemic. It didn't really impact to begin with, but then it has a bit more in terms of the proportion of people that are achieving 150 minutes. So what does that mean? Well, that suggests the proportion of people, because inactive is stable, but active has dropped a bit, the bit in the middle's grown. So those between between 30 and 149 minutes got a little bit bigger. Okay, why am I telling you this? Well, walking contributes it, doesn't it? Walking, as you will see in a minute, is the biggest provider to it in terms of minutes to this, and it's really important. And the Active Lives survey collects loads of data about walking. It surveys 500 people in every local, at least 500 people in every local authority in the country on an annual basis, rolling annual basis. So there's loads of data because loads of people walk. What the challenge has been organising that data to help Heather and you and others make some better decisions about just how much people are walking and how frequently people are walking, because that's the goal of Walk Derbyshire, is to get people walking more often, doing more minutes in the way that, as we've already discussed, we were pretty much designed to do. So what we've done with the data is we've looked at how we can create different groups, slightly different types of behaviour. So let me just explain this slide on that you've got in front of you. Let's start at the bottom. So 28% of people in the high peak, almost 3 in 10 people, are not walking. What on earth does not walking mean? Well, they haven't done a session of 10 minutes or more walking in the last month. They may have done some 6, 7, 8 minute sessions, but because they haven't got over the 10-minute threshold, we've put them as not walking. Why have we used 10 minutes? Well, for 2 reasons. It used to be part of the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation. It's been dropped recently, but there's still a relevance to it. But it also helps us think about our neighbourhood design and so on and so forth. So we use this, well, who's not walking 10 minutes? Well, there's nearly 3 in 10 people in the high peak that are not walking, haven't done a 10-minute walk or more in the last 28 days. The group above it have done between 1 and 7 sessions in the last 28 days of walks of 10-minute or more. Okay, the group above that have done between 8 and 27 sessions in the last 28 days, and then the top group, the regular walkers, they've done 28 sessions or more in the last month. So they're on, as a kind of proxy, we've used that 28 sessions or more in a month as daily walking. We can't say it is daily walking. They may have done 3 sessions on one particular day and none on the following day, but it's as close as we can get in the data because the data isn't organized by day. So we're using that as almost a proxy of doing 28 minutes or more, 28 or more sessions a month of 10 minutes or more. You're doing a lot of walking. You're walking pretty regularly. We've used that analysis throughout the data to kind of look at differences in demographics and so on and so forth. And I'll come back to that shortly. I just want to show you now the connection between those first 2 slides. Okay, and the connection between walking and being physically active, achieving the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation. Just focus on the left-hand side of this slide to begin with. So what you've got here is the not walking group, and so this, remember, this is about 28% of the population in high peak. Of that 28% of the population in high peak, 20% of those people managed to be physically active, managed to do their 150 minutes. But they don't get it through walking. They get it through other activities, swimming, everything, gardening, running, and they get it just through those activities. The chunk below, 67% of our not walkers are inactive. Okay, they're not getting above the 30-minute threshold. They're not walking and they're not doing anything else, and they're not getting above that 30 minutes of physical activity. Okay, look what happens to the inactive proportion as soon as we get people walking between 1 and 7 sessions a month. Look at how the inactive has disappeared almost and the active grows. So if we get people doing a bit of walking, getting over that 10-minute threshold once, twice, 3, 4 times in a month, maybe once a week, they're more likely to achieve the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation. And this is really important. Walking contributes big time to people being physically active because of some of the things that we've already said. So I'm going to now start to just look at these, what's been happening over the years and for different demographic groups using those 4 categories of not walking, walking less regularly, etc. But I'm going to mainly focus on who's not getting over that 10-minute threshold. What you've got here is the 6 years of data that we've got for each of these 4 groups in the high peak. And what you could see before the pandemic is the proportion of people not walking was reducing. It was getting better. It was improving. The red part of the diagram was getting slightly smaller, and it has got smaller again, but actually we've seen a growth, a little bit of growth in people that are not walking. Okay, but it's relatively stable in the last 3 years, that is what I'd say. Look at the top. The top bit's been relatively stable in the early part of the pandemic. Look at how the boomed, the regular walkers really boomed. Well, I live quite close to the Peak District, and I was walking up in there else, and I only had an hour to go and exercise, and there's probably a lot of people in the early part of the pandemic that took benefit of that, and we saw a lot of news about parking and all of that, and lots more rubbish and so on and so forth. Okay, you can see some of these patterns in the data. What does it look like for different demographic groups though? Well, what we've done here is we've taken that same grouping of behavior, of walking behavior, and we've then broken it down by different demographic groups. The 2 groups that I'll just need to explain: limiting illness, no limiting illness. If you can see that along the bottom axis, that's people with a limiting illness or disability or without. Okay, the other group that I'll explain on here is NSSEC. What on earth does that mean? It is socioeconomic classification. When we fill in the census, as we all did in March 2021, you answer a range of questions around your income, around your job, your qualifications, etc. And the Office of National Statistics puts every household in the country where there's people under the age of 75 living in it into socioeconomic classification. NSSEC 1 to 2 on the right of the screen is higher socioeconomic groups. It's people that are going to be doctors, lawyers, accountants. They're going to be directors and chief executives. They're likely to be better qualified and higher paid. NSSEC 3 to 5 is middle socioeconomic groups. It's kind of lower and middle management, as well as self-employed and small business owners and technically qualified people, job roles. And then you've got NSSEC 6 to 8 on the left, with the highest rate of proportion of people that are not walking. NSSEC 6 to 8 is people in routine and semi-routine work. What's that? Labourers on building sites, cleaners, retail workers on shop floors, etc. People on production lines. NSSEC 8 is people that are long-term unemployed or disabled. So you can see that we've got the highest levels of not walking in terms of our lower socioeconomic communities and people that are living with a limiting illness or disability. And you can see we're pushing up towards half of those groups that are not managing to get a walk of 10 minutes or more in the last month. I will come back to some of the lower socioeconomic group in a bit more detail. Just to show you this in another way, what we've taken here is just the proportion of people that are not walking, and we've plotted it as a trend for all of the different groups. Okay, you can see limiting illness. Yes, you can see a bit of an improvement from 6 years ago, but it's still high. We've still got over 4 in 10 that are not walking. And actually, you can see it from the lower socioeconomic groups. You can actually see how it improved pre-pandemic in our lower socioeconomic. That part of our community was starting to walk a bit, or more of them were starting to walk a bit more often. And then look at what the pandemic has done to walking within our lower socioeconomic community. Pushed it up to our highest level of the proportion of people that are not walking. Okay, I've also put a little orange box around our younger adults. Our younger adults don't like walking. We've seen this pattern. It's not just in the high peak. This is a pattern generally. They are more likely to get, younger adults, one of our more active groups. When you look at the overall minutes, they tend more likely to play sport and get their minutes from health and fitness and doing other things than maybe walking. Okay, walking is a habit that we start to get more into in age, especially walking for leisure. Walking for travel is a bit different. This group is likely to be more likely to walk for travel, and I will come back to that in a little bit. But just look at how high that, you know, not walking group is within our 16 to We've had to aggregate all the data. What do I mean by that? We've had to put all 6 years of data on top of each other to do this analysis, to be able to get a sample robust enough for us to be able to look at this. This is starting to just tease out work, work status that was mentioned earlier. So what you can see from this is those that are unemployed, the part of our population that are not currently in employment, will experience higher on the far left, and with the highest level of not walking. That's not the case in the high peak, interestingly, but we do certainly need to be thinking about those not in work in our thinking and our planning going forward. We've also cut this data by levels of deprivation. What on earth do I mean by there? We've used the indices of multiple deprivation. It's a model of factors that's pretty well used across local authorities and the public sector in trying to understand communities that are more deprived, i.e. they have lower levels of income, lower standards of education, etc., less access to local services, and then the least deprived, so better education, better income, etc. When we use that to look at, we can't, the model splits it into 10 different groups. We can't get the data by 10, so we've had to create quartiles. Okay, so our most deprived quartiles of areas of the high peak are experiencing higher levels of people not walking, and our least deprived areas are experiencing lower. We see this pattern consistently, almost consistently, I should say. The Bolsover stands out for a very interesting reason, but you can see how it steps down, and we're up near 35-36% of people within our more deprived communities that are not walking. So there is certainly something, and that would overlay with lower socioeconomic group, people with limiting illness and conditions. So there's a pattern emerging here for us to explore. I will help bring that down into local communities in a minute. I just want to explore in a little bit of more detail, just to kind of throw some pebbles in the pond, so to speak, in terms of thinking of your workshop coming up in February. Just exploring this lower socioeconomic side of the data. What we've done here is we've now just looked at lower socioeconomic groups. Okay, so you've now got a second demographic factor within our lower socioeconomic. What does it tell us? Well, you've got a quite big difference here, haven't you, between those with a limiting illness within lower socioeconomic groups. Over half of that part of our population are not walking, compared to a third of 16 to 34-year-olds within that part of our population that are not walking. Notice that all of these are pretty high, but we've still got some quite interesting differences here, with up over 4 in 10 of our middle-aged people in lower socioeconomic groups not walking, women not walking. This is a really interesting one. You won't know this, but I do, because this is number 7 in the workshops. Men in every other part of the Derbyshire that we've presented this data for to begin have been higher than women in terms of not walking. That is not the case in the high peak. Why? I am really intrigued by that, because the gender inequality has been the other way around everywhere else. But in the high peak, we've got a difference between men and women, and it's women that are not walking as much. What is that? Why have we got what we've got? Sarah, we'll come to questions at the end if that's okay. And so we've got some things to try and get our heads around here. The other bit that I just noticed is look at how small the regular walkers are in terms of the limiting illness and our middle, that middle age group. Bit bigger for women, so there's some women that are finding the ability to do it within lower socioeconomic communities, but also then a group that isn't. How do we try and understand that a little bit more if we can? I'm going to just try and this next slide's you're going to go, oh, what on earth is this saying? Just stick with me. There's some really interesting patterns to observe on it. What on earth have I put in front of you? Right, well, walking, we can split it into 2 kind of motivations, for want of a better description. I'm going out for a walk for leisure. That's the light blue towers. Okay, I'm going out for a walk to work, or I'm walking to the shops, or I'm walking to college, or I'm walking to school. That's the walking to travel data. Okay, just starting the 2015-16 towers on the left hand side of this. In 2015-16, on average, our lower socioeconomic communities were looking at doing 7 sessions of walking for leisure and 8 sessions of walking for travel. Okay. If you're wondering why is the walking for travel, even though it's 8 sessions, lower than the 7 sessions, well, the depth of the block represents the average length of the session. So the deeper the block, the longer the average length of the session. So the walking for leisure sessions were longer than the walking for travel sessions, okay, back in 2015-16. But look how similar those towers are. Now, go all the way to the right. Look at what's happened. Walking for leisure within low socioeconomic communities, for some people, boomed. It's gone up. We're doing 2 more sessions and we're doing longer sessions, and it's gone up. Now look at what's happened to walking for travel. It's gone from 8 sessions on average to 3. I'm going to show you this in another way in a minute. Look at when that change started to happen. It actually started to happen just before the pandemic, and then it's continued. Okay, I'm going to show it you in another way now, this shift that we've got and the role that the pandemic has played in it. Okay, what we've done is we can take all of those minutes that are done by lower socioeconomic communities in walking, and we can analyze them over the years of data. And what you can see here is from 2017-18, there has been a steady rise in lower socioeconomic communities. Done in terms of walking for leisure. Okay, but look at what's happened to walking for travel. It's gone down, it's plummeted, it's half what it was. So we've got this really interesting situation now where people that are walking have probably found a way of, you know, substituting the fact that I'm not walking as much, either getting to work or going to and from school, or whatever it might be. And I'll help understand that in a minute or two. And some people will have replaced it with walking for leisure, which is great, but some people won't. And I'm going to come back to designing things out of people's lives in a minute or two. Before I get into that, though, I'm just going to try and put us into place a little bit now. Put us into, well, where in the high peak should we go? And you know, how do we connect some of the groups that we're trying to reach into some of the places that we know we've got across the borough? This is some modelling that Sport England do they do it annually, but they haven't done it since before the pandemic, and it models inactivity, so that proportion of people that are doing less than 30 minutes, and we've mapped it for Derbyshire. And when you look at that data, it doesn't really help, does it? There's a couple of orange patches around Fairfield in Buxton and up near Glossop, where inactivity is slightly higher, okay, than we'd like it to be. You know, we're getting up to 28%, but remember, that's pre-pandemic data. But there's something else in the data set that we can use to get local, and it's just going to take me a couple of minutes to explain. What on earth are you looking at? Right, the Office of National Statistics, when we fill in the census survey, they put all of us into one of 75 little groups of people where we share similar characteristics. So it'll say things like more likely to be white British, you're more likely to live in a semi-detached house, you're more likely to have dependent children and 2 cars on your drive. You know, so it describes these little groups of people and these little cohorts. Okay, those 75 little groups, subgroups, build up into 25 groups, and the 25 groups build up into 8 supergroups of like characteristics. What we've got here is data for 5 of those 8 supergroups. That's what the constrained city dwellers, hard pressed living, urbanites, rural residents, suburbanites. That is the 5 of the 8 supergroups. Okay, there's a really good reason why I'm showing you this. Just stick with me. First thing to notice, though, is just notice who's on the left. Who is it that's not walking as much? It's these 2 groups, constrained city dwellers and hard pressed living. Well, we can use this data to get very local. Okay, so this is those groups. Look, press living, they're the color yellow. Okay, we can get down to street level. This is output area level data, basically up to 1,000 people, and this map tells us where this is. Now, the yellow and blue patch that you can all see, which will, you know, if you're local and you know it's Fairfield. Okay, and you know that's the, you know, it's a description of Bedfield. What I was intrigued by this is look at some of the other parts of Buxton where we've got constrained city dwellers, where it's highly likely they're not going to be walking as much. So how connected are those parts of town to places, and why might we have what we've got? I picked on Buxton. There is a link on here. There's a source where it'll take you to the link, but if you put the presentation, when we share it into presenter mode and click on the here bit, which is highlighted, you'll go to a free mapping tool and you can explore whichever town or village that you want to explore to understand where those constrained city dwellers and hard pressed living and some of the groups that are maybe not walking as much may be. And then you might be able to map that over housing developments or infrastructure work that you know is going to be coming up, to start to think about how we might test and learn. So I just wanted to show you that, and to just think about how we can use some of this data to get local and think about where the groups are that are not walking as much, living across the whole of the borough. I just want to build on it now about trying to unpick this place a little bit. When Martin, my colleague, started this analysis, he showed me that shift in walking for travel and walking for leisure, and it just blew my mind. And what I started thinking about was, well, it's more people working from home, that, isn't it? That's driven that. That's going to be changing working patterns, you know, more people. And then I saw some data from Greater Manchester in a workshop a few months ago, and it really shifted my view. Okay, what was this data? Well, I borrowed it, and I'm sure they won't mind. He's a lovely bloke, the guy that presented it, and it's really good information there. And I want Derbyshire to collect some stuff like this somehow, because it's really helpful. What on earth are you looking at from Greater Manchester? Well, they do their own data collection, and they've got this survey that was, and this is data from just before the pandemic, December 2019. Okay, and what does this show? Well, it shows where people walk. Those people that walk, where do they walk to? Right, look at that list. Look how low down work is. Okay, where do people go if they're going to go for, you know, connecting out for a walk, going out for a walk? Well, they go to green spaces, they go to their park, go out for a walk. They take kids to primary schools, they go to places of worship, they walk to the health centre, their GP, they walk to the job centre, their banks, they walk to secondary school, they walk to see families and friends. Look at, they walk for food shopping, non-food shopping. Then we get to work, and the likelihood of walking to work and the minutes from, you know, that contributing to. Now, I want you to look at that list and put on a slightly different lens. What did the pandemic do to GPs, to job centres, to food shopping, to non-food shopping, to banking? Pushed it all online. Didn't have a choice. Went online. Is it coming back? Maybe for some people that want it, but young adults that are pretty comfortable being online and doing their GP's appointments online, they're not going to be walking to their GPs unless they really have to. Some of these things have been designed out of our life by the pandemic, and we really need to ask ourselves some quite searching questions about, are they coming back? And if they are coming back, who are they coming back for? And if they're not coming back, well, what are we going to do about the way that our places are designed that encourage people to come and walk to them? And what do they want to connect to? How well do we understand what people want to connect to? I'd start with green space. It is not high peak data, it's GM, but it asks us really quite searching questions about us thinking about, what does a 20-minute neighbourhood need to look like now? Because it's different, arguably, to what it needed to look like before the pandemic. Finally, just one slide, and I'll mention why I put the slide in the image in the chat. We can't get this data at a high peak level. There's just not enough sample when we look at children and young people's physical activity level. So we've had to look at the county data and just use that. So when we looked at the county data, what did it tell us? Well, we've had to look at it slightly differently. So this is the proportion of children and young people in years, or you know, from 5 to 16 years old, that are walking at least once a week. Look what the pandemic did. Well, if you've got 2 young kids like that, that chart really resonates with me, because it was pretty much the only thing we could do as a family was either get out on the bikes for an hour or go for a walk. Well, it stuck around a bit, is the second year of it. We'll have a third year to add to this shortly, and we'll see whether it's still, but the early signs are it's continued. Walking has gone up amongst children and young people. Okay, what's really interesting and what's pushed this up is it's low affluent families and it's girls that are contributing the most to this increase. And there's a really interesting pattern amongst teenage girls, which we can share a slide deck. Heather can share a slide deck about that as well, where we have seen activity levels increase amongst teenage girls over the last 3 years, okay, on a really positive upward trend. It actually started just before the pandemic, but the pandemic has pushed it up. What's driving that increase in activity levels amongst teenage girls? Walking. So what is it that walking has found for what is it that teenage girls have found in walking that we can learn from and think about what we might use with some of our other groups and some of the other parts of our population that are maybe not walking as much?